In today's video, we're going to wrap up stage 1 of the novel, so that is chapter 19. And in chapter 19, we have some really key events, okay? One really key event. Okay, so we have a return to the Three Jolly Bargemen pub, and Pip is noticing there's this strange gentleman that's sitting there. We also have our Mr. Wopsle, who loves to, be orating and reciting. So he's reading this newspaper, and there's all kinds of suppositions he's making, and we learn that this gentleman, we see how he is actually chastising Mr. Wopsle and the rest, that they would so easily condemn a person because it should be innocent until proven guilty. And Dickens may want to emphasize that a little bit. So the gentleman asks to go to Joe's house with Joe and Pip. So off he goes, and Pip realizes that this is the man that he saw at Miss Havisham's. Remember that he'd encountered that man on the stairs whom he said that he didn't realize that they would actually have a connection. So this is the guy, okay? And he introduces himself as Jaggers, a lawyer from London. So we read here that, and then on page 124, he says to them, "I'm pretty well known. I have unusual business to transact with you, and I commence by explaining that it is not of my originating. If my advice had been asked, I should not have been here. It was not asked, and you see me here. What I have to do as the confidential agent of another, I do. No less, no more." And I mean, this is the way our lawyer is. He's constantly, that I have nothing to do with it. Everything just has to be kind of like detached. He's going to detach himself, okay? So, and I think that Dickens is also poking a bit of fun at lawyers, and just even that, they were willing to go against their conscience at times, just for wealth, right? And for greed. And that is something that doesn't go over well with Dickens. And so this is what he says, page 125. "And now I return to this young fellow, and the communication I have got to make is that he has great expectations. He will come into a handsome property. Further, that it is the desire of the present possessor of that property that he be immediately removed from his present sphere of life and from this place, and be brought up as a gentleman, in a word, as a young fellow of great expectations. My dream was out. My wild fancy was surpassed by sober reality." Pip wanted this so badly, wanted it, and it happens. He is so thrilled. The one stipulation is that he must keep his name Pip, and Pip sees no problem with that. And then they start to make some arrangements, and who's going to educate you and so on, but we'll leave that to the next section, some of that stuff. And then there's this scene where Joe is feeling really sad about it, okay? And Jaggers says, "Well, Joseph Gargery, you look dumbfounded." "I am." And then Jaggers thinks that Joe wants money. And Joe says, "Pip is that hearty welcome to go free with his services to honor and fortune as no words can tell him. But if you think as money can make compensation to me for the loss of the little child what come to the forge, and ever the best of friends. Oh, dear good Joe, whom I was so ready to leave and so unthankful to, I see you again, with your muscular blacksmith's arm before your eyes, and your broad chest heaving, and your voice dying away. Oh, dear good faithful tender Joe, I feel the loving tremble of your hand upon my arm, as solemnly this day as if it had been the rustle of an angel's wing." And I mean, it's really sad that Joe is so grieved, and Biddy is kind of sad, and it kind of annoys Pip on page 130. He says, "They both heartily congratulated me, but there was a certain touch of sadness in their congratulations that I rather resented." And he's frustrated. Then he is up and he's thinking, "I became quite gloomy, dissatisfied with my fortune. Of course I could not be, but it is possible that I may have been without quite knowing it, dissatisfied with myself. And, you know, Biddy knows how vulnerable Pip is to this moral corruption. And she is very concerned about her friend. What's going to happen to him when, you know, he gets into a life of privilege and the world. In chapter 19, Pip visits a marsh again and he thinks about the convict. Dickens doesn't want us to forget about that convict, so he takes him back there. In his final exchange with Biddy, Pip is like such a snob. He talks about how he wants her to keep teaching Joe, and he says on page 135, oh, his manners, won't his well, Joe is a dear good fellow. In fact, I think he is the dearest fellow that ever lived, but he is rather backward in some things. For instance, Biddy and his learning and his manners. Oh, his manners. Won't his manners do then? Asked Biddy. My dear Biddy, they do very well here. Oh, they do very well here. Hear me out. But if I were to remove Joe into a higher sphere, as I shall hope to remove him when I fully come into my property, they would hardly do him justice. And don't you think he knows that? Have you never considered that he may be proud? Proud? Oh, there are many kinds of pride. He may be too proud to let anyone take him out of a place that he is competent to fill, and fills well and with respect. To tell you the truth, I think he is, though it sounds bold in me to say so, for you must know him far better than I do. And that's kind of it. Then he leaves, and it's kind of an unfortunate parting. He goes into town, gets his clothes. Mr. Pumblechook is all over him, trying to, you know, butter him up. And, oh, it was because of me, and this and on. And there's just this real sadness and this real touch of, you know, this kind of loss of innocence at the end. He says, he goes also to see Miss Havisham, and that kind of torments poor Sarah Pocket. So at the end, it says, on page 145, he leaves the house. He said goodbye to Biddy and to Joe and to Mrs. Joe. But the village was very peaceful and quiet, and the light mists were solemnly rising, as if to show me the world, and I had been so innocent and little there, and all beyond was so unknown and great, that in a moment, with a strong heave and sob, I broke into tears. It was by the finger post at the end of the village, and I lay my hand upon it and said, "Goodbye, oh my dear, dear friend. Heaven knows we need never be ashamed of our tears, for they are rain upon the blinding dust of earth, overlaying our hard hearts." I was better after I had cried than before, more sorry, more aware of my own ingratitude, more gentle. If I had cried before, I should have had Joe with me then. So he carries on, but notice that at the end it says, we changed again and yet again, and it was now too late and too far to go back, and I went on, and the mists had all solemnly risen now, and the world lay spread before me. So remember that sort of mist imagery we encountered at the beginning when there's this, you know, encounter with the convict and just kind of signaling danger, and that's how Pip is going into London. You know, the mists are rising, and, you know, in some ways there's this hopeful tone that, you know, he's going, the world's opening before him, but there's also this incredibly somber tone because Pip is consciously leaving behind him, you know, his innocence, his morality. He's going to pursue worldly things that may not serve him well. So that's the end of stage 1 of the novel.